It's Create Day, my friends. Let's make some fun and functional garden markers. I've got 6 different types, so let's get started. I'm starting off with these contractor grade wood shims that I got from Home Depot. 3 of them will get a clear coat, and then the other 3 will get a coat of the Blossom White. I'm using StazOn ink in jet black and my letterpress stamps from IOD to print out the names onto the ones that I did the clear coat on. I want to have a more natural look. So I'm adding on my stamps. I'm working from the top of this downwards, so I'm doing it backwards. That way I don't have to worry about running out of room at the end of my wood shim. So for the letters that you have to use twice, I just leave a space in between by sticking another stamp in that place to get the spacing right, and then remove it and go ahead and ink up as much of the word as I can, and then stamp it on, and then go back in with the letters that you have to use the second or third time. There will be pictures of all the finished projects at the end of the video. I'm using black acrylic paint to cover the bottom portion of these. I wanted these to kind of have a hand dipped look to them, like that the black portion was hand dipped. So I just go ahead and do a couple of coats of this on all the way around the bottom of the shim. With that first one painted, I just used it as a guide so that the black paint on the bottom would be approximately the same on all 3 shims. For the ones that I did the white base coat on, I am going to paint in 3 different colors. The first one is called Red Alert, and this will be the one that I stamp the word tomatoes on. I'm painting the next one in leaf green, and I will be stamping green beans on it. And the third one I'm using Coral Cloud, and I will be stamping on cantaloupe. I forgot to mention that with these, before I did anything, I went ahead and trimmed off the end so it would have a point to it. So that's why they look kind of like a pencil. I just cut those down so that they would go into the soil a little bit easier. The ink I'm using for these is called Brilliance, and the color is Moonlight White. For the next 2, I switched to a different font. It's the same IOD Letterpress stamp. It's just skinnier letters so that I would have enough room to fit my words on there. For this one, I'm using the acrylic stamping block because the words were small enough that I could fit each one on there. And for the other one, I end up using a thin mount. And what I did was I bought 2 of the large thin mounts from Vonda at the Painted Heirloom, and I kept one as is in the large state for my large stamps, but then I have the other one that I can cut up and use like I did here. I just cut up a piece that would work to hold these letters for stamping onto these wood shims. Once everything is dry, I'm going to give them a couple of coats of this Rustoleum automotive enamel. It will give a really durable finish for something that's going to be outside. My next trio of markers, which are really just decorative, I'm going to use some transfers from the Iron Orchid Designs Ephemeral Melange. I also have some Dollar Tree wood planks that I can cut to the size I need. I'm using my handheld miter shears, but you could just use a utility knife to cut through this wood. It's pretty thin. So I just measure out the length that I need and mark it with a pencil, and that's where I make my cut. For this first one, it's just simply in the center. Cutting this in half will give me the right size for 2 of my transfers, and then I'll take another one and just trim off the end to fit the third transfer. I'm using a medium grit sandpaper to go around all those edges and kind of round those pointy corners a little bit. So now I have my transfers and my little wood planks cut to size. It's time to start painting. I'm starting with burnt sienna. It's kind of an orangey brown, so I water it down, and I'm going to use this as kind of like a stain. So I'm brushing it on and then taking a baby wipe and wiping a lot of it off. Then I want to go in with my espresso bean. I'm watering that down as well, and we'll go over each plank just like I did with the first color. When I wiped back that espresso bean color with the baby wipe, to me they were still too orangey, so I went ahead and applied another coat and just left it to dry. Now it's time to add a little weathering to these, so I'm using my white gesso, and just with a very dry brush, I dip it in the paint, wipe it off on the paper towel, and dry brush over the planks. And here you can see the difference between the two. So now it's time to apply our transfers. I'm going to remove the backing, lay that transfer onto the wood plank, and then using the little transfer tool, I will just rub over this design until it releases from that carrier sheet. You just want to start to remove it gently so that if there's a section that hasn't transferred over yet, you can lay it back down and finish rubbing on it. And you just work your way down until the whole thing comes off. Then I burnish it with that transfer sheet to make sure it's adhered really well. I gave all of these a coat of my Select Seal matte sealer. This step probably wasn't necessary since I'm going to use the automotive spray, but if you're going to have these just indoors, this would be sufficient for your sealer. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch square wood dowel rod that I cut to 10 inches in length, and I'm going to give it the same paint treatment that I did the wooden planks, starting with the burnt sienna and then going on to the espresso bean brown. I hope you're finding my content useful, and if there's anything that I'm not clear about, please hit me up in the comment section and I will answer your questions. I really do appreciate each and every one of you for being here and hanging out with me today. Now it's time to attach our little stakes to our wood planks. So I'm just going to use my Gorilla wood glue and brush it on the back of that wood dowel and press it into place onto the plank. I really like the way these turned out, and again, there will be pictures of the finished projects at the end of the video. This next one is probably my favorite. They're so rustic and cute. I'm using just some twigs that I gathered from my yard and another one of the wood planks from Dollar Tree. I'm going to cut one plank down into this size because I'm going to make it like a little sign on each twig. So I'm using my miter shears to cut my twigs down to size. And then we will make those little wood planks into a weathered looking sign for an herb garden. I lightly sanded down my twigs just to remove any loose bark or anything that might have been on there. And that piece I'm using as a guide to mark to cut more pieces was the end piece from the longer one that I did with the transfers, and it was just the right size. So I used that and made a total of 4 of these, and then I'm sanding down all the rough edges. Next step, I'm using smoked glaze. It's kind of a gray color, and I'm going to brush this on and then wipe it off with a baby wipe, and we will get a nice rustic aged look on these little planks. Now I'm going in with my white gesso. I'm again doing a dry brush. I needed to lighten this up just a little bit so that my lettering would stand out, and I wanted it to look a little more weathered than just the gray glaze did. So here's where I've marked off with painter's tape where the lettering needs to be. It can't be, I don't want it centered, it needs to be off to one side because these are going to be attached to the twigs at that one end. So instead of freehanding these on the actual little wood planks, I wrote onto bakery tissue until I got it. My freehand is awful. I hate it. So I just did it over and over again until I could live with it. And then with my water pen, I'm just tearing around those words so that I can decoupage these onto the little wood planks with Mod Podge. And once they're on there, I go ahead and do a coat of the Mod Podge over the entire plank. Now I'm using hot glue to attach the little signs to the sticks, and that by itself probably wouldn't hold very long term, but I am going to be wrapping twine around this as well, so it should be just fine. So now I have some jute twine, and I'm going to start with attaching that with some hot glue at the back, and then I'm going to wrap this around in a crisscross motion, and then I will finish it off at the back with another dot of hot glue. I absolutely love these. They look like little Survivor signs. I don't know if you're a fan of Survivor. Oh, I love that show. Next up is making use of some scrap wood, and I have molds that I've made out of resin. This hummingbird is from the Dewdrop Pond mold from IOD. I'm starting off this one with a coat of my black chalk paint. And I'm painting the hummingbird in Dixie Belle's Blueberry. This one has a resin casting from the Butterfly in Flight mold by Redesign, and the block of wood is getting a coat of white chalk paint. I'm painting the butterfly in Lucky Lavender by Dixie Belle. The third one, I'm painting Sage Shadow chalk paint onto the wood. I was down to the bottom of the barrel of, of this one. I was just digging it out with a paintbrush and slapping it on there. But no worries, we didn't run out. I had a new bottle waiting for me if I needed it. So now to paint the frog, I'm going to mix some colors here. I've got 3 different greens: hunter green, olive green, and deep celery. I mixed these together and painted him, but he ended up being still too dark, so I mixed in some white to lighten it up a little bit. I was going for like a monochromatic thing here with the green block and the green frog, but different shades of green. And oh my gosh, I apologize for the barking dog. So now I'm completely thrown off here. Okay, so I'm gluing the hummingbird on with the Gorilla Wood glue, but what I was showing you while I was talking about the dog, is that I went with sandpaper around all the edges of the blocks to distress them a little bit. So now we're just applying our hummingbird, and then we will go on to the next step, which is sealing these with a coat of my Fusion Clear, because I'm going to be going in with some stamps, and I just wanted that chalk paint sealed so I didn't have to worry about anything going wrong here. And again, I'm using the letterpress stamp from IOD. Now for our little frog, I want to add some toadstools. That stamp is from Tuesday Morning, and these two are from Dollar Tree. And I'm using Archival ink in the color Peat Moss. I'm going to ink up this Enjoy Life stamp and place that on the top portion. And then I will be doing the mushroom stamp down on the bottom next to the frog. I'm using StazOn ink in jet black to apply this stamp to my little butterfly block. I'm using Dixie Belle's Grunge Glaze to get into all the little details of these castings that I've done here. I'm going to brush this on and then dab off the excess with a baby wipe. Once that is dried, I'm going in with some Spanish copper rub and buff for the frog. I'm using a short, stubby brush that I can dip into the rub and buff, wipe off the excess on the paper towel, and then lightly apply it over all the raised details of the frog. I decided to add some of the rub and buff around that front edge where the wood was distressed, just to kind of frame it in and make it more grounded. So I'm just using my finger for this, just gently going around those edges. For the butterfly, I'm using Artalchemey metallic wax in the color Rose Gold, and I'm able to just use my finger to apply this to all the high spots. For the hummingbird, I'm using Gilded Touch gilding wax in the color Pearl. We are on the last set of garden markers, and again, these are decorative. I'm taking two of those wood shims that were spray painted with a base coat of white, painting them with white acrylic paint, and then I'll be applying Tim Holtz's collage paper and the pattern Botanical with my Mod Podge. I spread the Mod Podge on apply a strip of the collage paper, and then I use my brayer to smooth it down. I trim off the excess at the ends and the top, and then I can use a sanding block once it's dry to sand off the edges hanging over, and then I can go over it with a coat of the Mod Podge. And you want to go over the entire piece, especially around the edges, to make sure it's sealed really well. Now I'm painting some castings I did with resin. This is the frames mold from IOD, and the other one is from the Olive Crest mold, also from IOD. I did a base coat of white chalk paint to get more coverage, and then I went over it again with some acrylic paint. It was just, a thinner consistency, and it was easier to get it into all those details. Now I want to apply a couple of numbers. So I'm using StazOn ink in jet black, and just these numbers are from the Letterpress Stamp Collection by IOD. So I just ink them up and put one on each of these little plaques. This one was a little bit smudgy. Working on that curved center was not the easiest, but I made up for it by this one being a better impression, but it was not centered. So there you go. Now I'm going to attach these to my wood shims that have been decoupaged with just the Gorilla wood glue, brushing it on there, getting it centered, and then setting it aside to dry. Next step is adding a little bit of age to the edges of these. I'm going in with some Archival ink in the color Shadow Gray. I'm using a little sponge applicator to rub this across the high points of all those details around the perimeter. I then go in with a little tiny brush and get those areas that the sponge applicator can't quite reach, like right underneath the bottom of that. So I'm just rubbing, this is just like an old small paintbrush, so I don't have to worry about it being ruined. I'm just rubbing it in that ink and then applying it to the areas that the sponge dauber couldn't reach. I do the same process on the other one, and then these, as well as all of the other items I made today, get 2 to 3 coats of that automotive enamel sealer. That will ensure that they will last for at least a couple of seasons outdoors. So let's take a look at how everything turned out. Thank you so much for joining me today. I absolutely loved making these. They were quick, they were easy, and especially they were inexpensive. It was just a total win. I hope you got inspired to go create some garden decor, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.